Okay, welcome to this tutorial. So we're going to get started with looking at this looping animation that I created. I'll give y'all a quick breakdown just of the scene overall. I'm using HDRI from Grayscale Gorilla to do the vast majority of the lighting, and then I kind of have some different lights set up in here. So I've got one, hitting this background that makes this gradient behind the looping animation. Then I have one key light set here, and then one fill light. I'll kind of go through those later, but I just want to get into making this looping animation. So I'm going to set this into rendered or into solid view. We're going to use this as a graph editor as we go. This is actually a really simple animation as far as conceptually. There's not too much going on. It really just is some simple math divided out to make it to where it creates these nice patterns and loops. So for this animation, I rendered this out at 60 frames per second. So if you go over here to your output tab, you can set this to 60 or 30 or 24. I will say that this is a lot of frames, 360 frames to render out. So if you wanted to render this out at 30 frames per second, you could just make this a 180 frame animation and then, half all these numbers that we're about to do. But for me, I just did 60 frames per second because I had a 30-second timeline that I was using in DaVinci Resolve. And so I wanted to be able to, speed ramp and have all the frames there. So I rendered it out at 60, but take that as you will. So if you want to follow along with me, we're going to do it in 60 frames per second, but you could also do all this and then go to like the beginning of your playhead, select all your keyframes, scale it down to 180, and you could do it 80 or 180 frames at 30 frames per second, and the motion will look the same. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at modeling this little stick. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn off everything that I have in here, and I've gone ahead and just brought me one stick into this view that we're going to use to model a new stick. So first thing we're going to do is Shift A. I do have a screencast enabled so you can see these here. So Shift A, we're going to add in a mesh cube. You can see that this is just the default width, 2 meters. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit A and then SZ and then 10 to scale it by 10 in the Z axis. And then I'm going to go into top view and just bring this over. And then we're going to scale this down to match in the Y direction. So I'm going to tab into edit mode again, SY, and I think it's 0.5. It was. One thing that I wish I hadn't done in my animation was I left a gap in here from the mirror modifier. And so we're going to do it a little bit differently when I model it here. So now we're going to tab into edit mode again, press 2, and then I want to grab all of these edges that face in the Y direction. And so I can do that with Control Alt click, and that's going to give me those. And then I'm going to do Control B to bevel and get that rounded end. You'll see that they intersect. So if you press C on your keyboard, you'll see at the bottom where it says clamp, and now they'll intersect. And then I'm going to just scroll up my middle mouse wheel until I get to 12 segments. And then one thing that we gotta be careful of is we just created some overlapping vertices right here. You can see if I move this one, there's one directly underneath it. So we're gonna A, select everything, M, and then this is the merge menu. So we do merge by distance. That's gonna get rid of those 4 vertices here. And then just to give us this nice little detail ridge in the middle that I kind of wanted on my original, I'm gonna do Control R and add in a loop cut, and then just escape to get rid of that. And then we're going to hit 2 to go into edge mode, Control B, and then I'm just going to scroll my mouse wheel down until I get something like that. Looks pretty good. And then hit 3 to go into face select mode, and then if you do Shift E, right, actually Alt E, we can do extrude faces along normals and just move your mouse up or down. I'm just going to bring it down, something like that. And then the last little thing is to make this kind of indent. So if I tab in edit mode, press 3, and I grab the front and back face, I'm going to go into front view, just kind of use this as a reference, and I press I to inset. I'm just going to bring that down till it looks pretty similar. And then same thing as before, Alt E, extrude faces along normals, just bring that down to something like this. That looks good to me. And then press 2 to go back into edge mode, Control B, and let's just bevel that, give it a nice little bevel. I'm going to give this, let's just say 8 segments here, just make sure I have some geometry. And the last thing I'll do just to kind of round these edges is we'll click over here into the modifiers and we'll add a bevel modifier. I'll set this to 0.05. Let's try 0.01. You can see where these edges are changing. So let's go 0.02. Yeah, I like that. And then we're going to set this to 6. That's just going to round those edges out. And the last thing I'll do is right click and then shade auto smooth. So now you have that beautiful shape. Okay, so now we're going to talk about making this loop. So the very easiest way to make this loop is just to, I'm going to get rid of this one that I just created. So we're going to use the one that I already have set up here. But what I need to do is I need this to rotate around. I'm going to turn my panel back on and go to item. I need it to rotate around its center origin in the X direction. So on frame 0, I'm going to click or right click on this X rotation channel and hit S. That's going to insert a keyframe only on this X channel. I can highly recommend doing this as opposed to, pressing I, which is going to set a keyframe on all these. We really don't need these other keyframes. And when we go to our graph editor over here, it's just going to make it more confusing. So let's go back and just make sure that we have one keyframe here, and then we're going to go to frame 360. And then I want this to rotate away from the camera. So I'm going to go up here and type -360. So one full rotation. You can see it looks like it didn't even change. And then I'm going to right click and press S. And now you can see if we play our animation, also this is my depth of frame or my depth of field. It was animated to kind of follow some stuff. So I'm just going to turn this off for now. So yeah, this is just looping, and you can see when it gets to the end of the timeline, it just seamlessly keeps going. Now I will say, because let's go over here and change this window to a graph editor. So click in this little icon menu, press E, go to editor, select your object, and then I'm going to do A to select all the keyframes. If you don't see them on your screen, you can go up here, go to view frame selected. That's going to frame them really nicely for you. I have that set to my quick favorites. So if you go view frame selected, right click that, and then add that to your quick favorites. That means if I'm off in Never Land somewhere, I can hit A and Q and just hit frame all, and it's going to immediately pull me back. And it's so handy when you're trying to do this. Now you'll see we have Bezier interpolation, which means, this is the graph of how quickly it's changing. So you can definitely tell in this area where it's more steep, it's quicker. So if I do A and then I do Shift T, no, not Shift T, just press T, and then I can set how I want these to behave. So I'm going to set this to linear as opposed to Bezier. And what that's going to do is it's going to mean at the end of my animation here, it's going to keep rolling at the same speed. This is kind of the effect that I want. Now, the only issue is I want to be able to duplicate this, and I want to be able to make 12 copies, and I'm going to offset them in 15-degree increments, and that gets me to 360 or 180, which would then loop. And so what I need to do is I need to make copies of this, but if I move, let's just say I, Shift D and I move this over, and then I go down here to these keyframes, I'm like, okay, A, G, X, and I want to move these keyframes just 15 over. The issue is it's not going to start, they're going to all start here, and then they're going to pick up and go. So I don't want that. So I'm going to just delete this one again. We're going to go back to our original one. And then if you go over here, you can grab all your keyframes with A, and then you're going to do Shift E, and that's going to give you your ability to add a make cyclic modifier. And all that's going to do is it's going to say, okay, I'm going to repeat this action, your keyframes, throughout the entire timeline. So it doesn't matter where I go, I'm going to be able to set that up. So now if we wanted to, we could go ahead and duplicate all of these 12 sticks that we're going to create, but I want to go ahead and add the sphere as well, so that way I can copy all 3, and then I can duplicate the keyframes for all 3. So one thing I want to do real quick is let me just double check on my thing here. I'm going to hide our tutorial one that we just created. The way I set this up is if you go to the point at which your stick is rotated exactly flat. So if you go here, you can see that, well, it's actually going to be here. This is the point at which I added a keyframe, and I added it at one end, and then I went 180 over to the other end and added one more keyframe, and then you go 180 past that and put it back. So if I go over here, turn this off, I turn tutorial back on, we're going to go to frame 90, which means if I go into right hand view, you can see this is perfectly horizontal. I'm going to do Shift A and add in a mesh UV sphere, and I'm just going to bring this over like this. And then I'm going to go to top view. I'm going to tab and edit mode, scale this down. I just want it to kind of fit within this trough or this little tray. And then also I don't want it to intersect, so I'm just going to press numpad period to zoom into this. And then if I kind of go inside the stick, I can see where it's intersecting. I'm just going to do GZ and bring that up to where it's just barely intersecting. I kind of like it when it looks like it's, sitting. If it is barely touching, a lot of times it can kind of seem like it's floating. So here, what we're going to do is I'm going to basically just move this, and I'll show you another way we can do this. I'm just going to press I. I'm going to add a location keyframe on all of these. And then if I move forward from 190, we're going to go to 270 here. I can now go, okay, I need to move this GY. I'm going to bring it over like so. I'm going to go to top view and just kind of make sure that it looks like it's set where it needs to be. You can see we only really changed the Y. So now if I just hover over this and press I, I can grab this keyframe and then do Shift D and then 720 because we're doing, or excuse me, 360 because we got to go full rotation. So I'm going to do 360. And then now what you see, if I go into the right hand view, oh, this is not wrong. And the reason this is wrong is back here at 90, we have to parent this to this object. So I'm just going to delete these keyframes. I think I messed that up. So let's grab this guy, grab this with shift click and then do Control P, object keep transform. And now this is staying with the stick as it rotates. But then now we can go back to here and say, okay, on frame 90, we have this keyframe, which is good. And then now we can go to 270, which is 180 in the other direction. And we can move this GY over here. I'm gonna go to the bottom, just bring this to right here. And now we're gonna do I again. Now you can see that if I go to the right hand view, it's going to start here and it's going to go to the other end just like we want. And then basically we just need to duplicate this keyframe in a full rotation. So if I do Shift D to duplicate that keyframe and then I type 360, that's going to move it over. So now we could watch this from here to here and it's going to start, go to the bottom, and it's going to roll back. And then the same issue we have on the other one where we can't really get it to do what we want because it has, it's not cyclic. So let's go over here. First of all, if you're watching this, it's only moving on the Y. So let's right click this and do clear single keyframes on both of these. What that's going to do is just going to make sure when we duplicate it, it doesn't try to jump back to this position in the X or the Z direction. So, and then let's grab all these over here with A, let's do Shift E and then make cyclic. And what that's going to do is no matter where we are in this timeline, this little ball is going to be following his good course. So then what I'm going to do is go back to frame 90. We need another one of these. So I'm going to do Shift D and the Z. And then I'm going to go to it just like that with notepad period. I'm kind of going to go inside our stick again and then just do GZ, make that barely intersect. And then now if you press play, you have two balls that are rotating along this deal. You could also come up here to your keyframes. If I do A, keyframe selected. If you grab your keyframes here, let's just say like, you know, if we're watching these balls go along and it's like they're rolling down to the end and then they're kind of like immediately coming back. If you want to grab these, you could scale this. And what that's going to do is they're going to make them, and make sure you're set to individual centers here. You can do that, I think, up here as well. Yeah, set your thing to individual centers. And now you'll watch, we're only changing this one right now, so you can see the difference. See how this one is, you know, really ramping and then hanging out. So you can kind of play with these and do whatever, you know, view you want. I would make sure that you select both of them and then press A or just kind of box select over these. And that way, if you scale them, you could even scale them down like this. And now they're going to still match in their direction. So I'm going to do something scaled up a little bit more like this. I think I like that. So they come down. Yeah, I like the way that feels. Okay, perfect. So now let's go back to frame 0. And another thing that's important is I tried doing this earlier. One of the tutorials versions I messed up. I started it at the ends versus starting at the middle. It's important that it starts at the middle because we're going to duplicate it over and it basically ends up at 1.5 rotations. So it needs to finish at the center point as opposed to finishing at the ends. But the good news is now that we have these, there's no X keyframes, there's no Z keyframes. So I can grab all of these. And then we're going to do Shift D and X direction, and that's going to move this over. And I need 12 copies, so that's copy 2. And I'm going to do Shift R, so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And now if we play this, they all perfectly loop. The balls are all following on their track, and they look really, really nicely. Now, the one thing I will say before we do all this, let's just put this back. If you want to, you can tell in my animation, if I turn this off and turn the props back on, or product on, and let's go back to here and you set this to rendered. Also turn my lighting back on. I added this sphere or this ring around this first one because I wanted it to rotate. So let's go check these keyframe rotations here. So what I did on this one was I went to the end and let's check my keyframes here with item. So at this one, I gave it a rotation of 0. And then at the very end, like once it makes it to the other end, I set it to 1440, which is 360 times 4. So 4 full rotations. And so like if we go back to this other one, let's turn this off. Let's turn this off. Let's set this to solid, turn tutorial back on. I'm going to move this inside this collection I just created. So at this point, if we wanted to, matter of fact, let's do it at this point at 90. We could grab both of these and give them a R rotation or an X rotation keyframe. So S And then I'm gonna need this to rotate negative. So then if I went to the point at which it made it to the other end, which is here, I could set this to negative 1440, press S, and then, you know, back here, I just basically need it to go back to 0 at 450. So then I could set this back to 0, S, or right click and press S. And then it's gonna be kind of hard to see. Oh, jumped around. But if I watch this, you can tell that this is rotating in the other direction. So let's just do that with the other one too. So let's set it back to 90. Let's grab this one. We're gonna set this to a rotation at 0. So if you watch it as it comes down, that means it's gonna be rolling this way. So then I would go to the point all the way at the other end. Let me just double check. That's gonna be a positive rotation for this one. So I set it 270, set it to 1440. Right click, press S, and then if I go back to here and I set it back to 0, right click, press S. Now you're gonna have them both rolling around the along the stick, which just kind of helps with the realism as opposed to, you could do both. You could have them just kind of sliding, but I liked it when they had a rotation keyframe on there. Okay, and then the last thing that we need to do is for these two, we need to also make them cyclic. So let's grab both of those, go into the editor. If we drop this down, we can see this X rotation, which we just added. So I'm gonna just hide both of those. And then if I frame them, you can see, like, you know, they're not gonna be rotating until we start at here. So if I grab A, Shift E, and then do make cyclic now, they're gonna rotate no matter where they are in the keyframe. Okay, now we can do our copying and we have all of our animation built in. So I'm gonna set this back to just like the camera view. And then let's go into here. Let's grab all of these, and then we need, like I said, we need 12 copies. So Shift D in the X direction, bring that over. So that's copy 2. We're gonna do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And this is the basis of it. Now, all that's left is we want them to be offset, and we're offsetting by an increment of 15 degrees because we want it to be divisible into 180 and 360. So, you know, the first one I'll leave alone, but then I'm gonna box select on these three. I'm gonna press A to grab everything, and then do G, X, 15. And then I'm gonna grab all these and do AGX30. And now it's time for a little bit of math. So AG40, AG45, grab these, AG60. Hopefully I don't mess this up. AG75, AG90, AG105, AG120, AG135, AG150, AG165. So now if you go to the right hand view, you should basically see a circle divided up into, you know, these 12 individual segments that we have offset by essentially 15 degrees. And now if we go into our front view, you can see we've got our balls tracking along, and if you go to the end, it perfectly loops. So this is the basis of the entire animation. So this is what I set up. It was kind of based off of a reference on Pinterest. And so now let's just really quickly jump into the lighting and the materials. And then I'm going to also show you a quick breakdown of some of the other scenes as well. So let's go ahead and do some texturing. I'm going to turn off the tutorial and just put these back in, the ones that I had originally. So I'm going to go back to render view, just so you can be aware of the rendering stuff. So I'm in cycles. I had it set to just 150 samples and a noise threshold of 0.03. A really good trick to use. Let's just do a little quick test render. If I set this to like 50%, I rendered this out at full HD, so 1920 by 1080. And then if we set this to 50% just to make it kind of a quick render, a good test to do, this is something that a good buddy of mine is really helping me understand about how to use samples. Go to, well, first of all, let's just render this frame. I'm going to render this image. I bring this up. And it's already done. That is a 1.93 second frame. Now, granted, this is low resolution, so let's go ahead and bump this up to 100. And let's render again. Okay, this is a really good trick. If you have this slot up here, you can basically move across them with the numbers at the top of your keyboard. So if I press 2, it's gonna go to slot number 2. And then what I'm gonna do for this one is go back to my rendering and set this up to like 400. And I'm gonna render this image. And I don't know how well it's going to show in, you know, with YouTube compression and everything uploading. But if I zoom in here, I can basically start to see, like if I press 1, I can swap between them. So like I'm going to really zoom in here. And if I do 1 and 2, you can really start to see, like, especially in the texture on this cork and stuff, you can see where the noise is kind of coming in. So what I would do is I would just keep doing that until you render and you are happy with the amount of change. So like if you do 100 samples and then you do 300, and 300, you know, has way less noise, compare 300 to 500, and then if 500 looks essentially the same as 300, just go ahead and render out at 300, and that's typically how I work. So, okay, let's quickly break down the lighting again. I know I talked about this briefly, but if I just turn everything off, let's just do that. I love doing that to see kind of where everything comes from. So, first of all, let's turn on the lighting, and then we will go through those. These are just those circles that I added when I was helping, so I'm just going to delete both of those real quick. I really have the background here, and I have 2 area lights. So this is a very simple setup, and I'm really happy with the overall look. I think a lot of people tend to, I will show you my other scene that had a lot more lights than this, but a lot of times you can really get, you know, really cool looking renders with, you know, not a ton of complexity. So, you know, this basically, I need to rename them. This is my key light, and then this is basically my fill light on the bottom right. So if you look at the key light, it is set to 50 here. Let's click this. It's set to 180, so it's basically a full, you know, illuminating plane of light. It's really, this scene is really big, so like these numbers are really high. Typically I try to work a little closer to real world scale, but because of that, my lighting numbers are really, really high. So it's basically just me doing that. And then if, like you've seen in my other videos, if you go over here to your rendering stuff and you set this, I have this set to AGX and very high contrast, but if you set this to false color, this is a really good way for you to see if you have things that are blown out. So I know that the background is white and I'm using a really bright light, so I know that it's kind of blown out. But if I look, you know, at the actual you know, thing that I'm really focusing on, having a good range of colors from, you know, blues and darks to all the way up to kind of oranges and yellows and red really means that you're getting to, at least in my opinion, you're getting some pretty good contrast and you're not just having flat lighting. So I use this all the time to double check. So I mean, then if I add this fill back in, you can kind of see instead of being fully blue and dark down here, I'm kind of going from a warmer down to a more softer light here. So that's kind of what those are doing. So if I set this back to AGX, that's going to give you that. And then still you can see like these shadows are really, really dark. They're very, very dark. So then I went back and I added in an HDRI. So if I just go into rendered view over here and set to 0, but then I set this to 2. This is my favorite HDRI ever from Grayscale Gorilla. It's the Creative Office. I love the fact that it has, you know, this really bright side. So you get really still a directional light. And so you'll notice that I'm using the brightness of this HDRI that's lined up with this key light, so that, you know, I'm still getting some fill light in these shadows, but I don't have a strong light source on this side that kind of contrasts against that, and that kind of really helps with the lighting on this. And so the last thing let's look at some materials. You guys know I love Grayscale Gorilla. I use all their assets. So if I pull up their thing here, this is the silver hammered metal that I'm using. I'm gonna go into the shader editor here. If I click on this, I'm not using their base color. Their base color, if I plug that back in, was a lot lighter. I kind of like this darker, more gunmetal look. So I went ahead and unplugged that, and I played with the colors till I was happy with it. And then for this cork, I'm actually doing something a little bit different. Grayscale Gorilla has this option to use triplanar projection. So if you right click, I can send it with triplanar. And I don't fully understand all the math. I'm probably not the best person to explain it, but essentially what it does is, you know, it's using a point in space and then it's mapping them from, you know, multi directions. I know tri means 3, so I think it's like, you know, in 3 axes projecting it. It's similar to box projection. If you click, you know, right click and then U and, you know, box project your UVs. And so the only other thing that I have going on here, if I unplug this location and I unplug this scale, first of all, I'm going to set this to something that kind of makes sense, 0.075. The only issue is this is something that I picked up from Chad from Grayscale Gorilla as well. If you look here, you're going to see repetition in the so look, you see how we have all these same dots right here? That's something that I wanted to use one material, but I didn't want it to look like the same material on each one. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the object info node and the random. And so if I just preview this down to here, basically what that does is it gives me a value from 0 to 1 on each object with this material applied. And then basically all I'm doing is I'm taking it and I'm multiplying 0 to 1 and I'm crunching it down to a value of 0.8 to 1.5. And then I'm multiplying that by this number right here. And what that does is if I plug this back in, go here, let's look at the shader. Basically what that does is it is adding micro variation in the size of these. So if you see this little spot right here, it's a good bit smaller than this one here. And then the last thing that I do to make sure that they don't look exactly the same is I take that same 0 to 1 number, and then I basically grab the X and Y component, and then I just add a random multiply node. And then I recombine them back in and add them to the location. And all that does is it tells it like to start from a different point. So it basically shifts it. And then now if you look, there's basically no repeating pattern in those materials. So that's where I'm doing for those. There isn't anything super complex on these. It really just is a matter for me of changing this value. And then also, I don't know if they're still in here. I think they delete out when you don't have used material. I think I have mine set to do that. But I went through probably 12 to 15 different materials playing with this until I liked the look of the warmth of this scene and the interaction with these colors. And then yeah, for the other shot, all I did was, if I would go to my cameras here, let's set this back to D. And then if I duplicated my one camera, first of all, I'll talk about this camera real quick. I had this set to 135 millimeters. A lot of these kind of product shots, or something focused on like a studio set, are going to be pretty high for me, either 135 or all the way up to 200. And then I have it set to a focus object for depth of field, so I just have a empty right here. And then because I had some shots where like I was following this, I had it animated with some simple keyframes. And then to get that other shot that was in the video that you saw at the beginning, I just duplicated this and I grabbed this camera and clicked in on this view and clicked camera to view. And now you can kind of operate it like the Cinema 4D camera, where you kind of move and just find a angle that you like. And I would just press play and then watch this, and then I zoomed in. That right there is basically the exact angle. So that's basically what I did for that. And then one other trick to do that, so I'm going to press Control Z and put that camera back. Before you do this in this shot, I would grab both of these, your background, and I parent it to this, so to this camera here. So not that one, this one, Control P, object keep transform with K. And that way, if I'm moving this and like I'm rotating around the 3D cursor, like this, it's wrong camera. Set this to active and then RZ. Like now my gradient stays nice and behind. You could get this like cool shot from this angle. You can kind of do whatever you want to at that point. Okay, that is basically the full breakdown of this scene. Let me jump over to the other two scenes and we're going to do a quick breakdown of both of those. Okay, here's a quick breakdown of this scene as well. Basically all I did in here, I want to talk about the materials in this one, I think, because it's kind of a neat little workflow that I've got going on. So I'm going to go into rendered view over here. The other one was very simple as far as the lights are going, whereas this one definitely has a couple more lights. So I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 8 lights set up here. A couple of them have gobo textures. So if you go over here, any of these lights that have a very small, I don't think it's that one, but like this one, anyone that has this thing plugged in, this has a gobo texture on it, and that's giving me this nice gradient, or this kind of nice texture to the light in here. I started out with very basic, just fully illuminated planes, and it really was kind of falling flat to me. So this is a really good trick to kind of add some texture to your light. So I think I have gobos on at least 2 or 3 of these lights. And then all I'm doing when I set these lights up is the majority of this scene comes down to the lighting and materials. Like if I just set this to solid, all I have is the camera moving forward on its axis with some keyframes. It really is really simple. And then what I did for both of these kind of like plywood sheets, bent plywood sheets, was I set the cursor to here, and then I just added, one keyframe in this position, and then I just have it rotating around, this place in point, and just adding some motion to it and kind of revealing that metal ball. So really nothing crazy here at all. This was really all focused on trying to get, the lights and the materials to look good. So real quickly, let's talk about the materials. I have that same hammered metal on this, but then if we go into our shader editor here, for this plywood, I have 2 materials. Grayscale Gorilla has these really cool plywood edge. First of all, they have like plywood materials, all these different types. So I'm using one of these, and then for the edges, they have a separate map. So what I did here was, if you go into tab and edit mode, just to make this shape, just real quick to cover that, I think I did Shift A, add in a mesh cube. I think I scaled it by 2 in the X direction. Let's set this to individual origin. So let's just do scale, Shift Y. That's going to only scale it in those 2 directions by 2. And then 1, and Alt Z, grab those and delete it. And then I think I added a bevel modifier and just cranked that up until it kind of looked like the reference I was looking at, so just like 20. And then I think I added a solidify modifier and just cranked that up like so. Make sure I set it to even thickness, and then yeah, that's basically that shape. And then I think I left this in like a trash collection, I can't remember, but then I just went ahead and applied both of these. So with Control A, apply both, and now you've got that shape. And then so real quickly, let's just go through setting up the UVs on this. If I just do this and then do Control L, link materials, I'm gonna hide both of these and hide this. Let's just bring this over into here as well. So yeah, let's just bring this, let's take a look real quick. I'm just gonna tab into edit mode, scale everything down a little bit so it fits in camera. So then what I really need to do is I need to UV map this. So what I would do is, this kind of looks okay, but I need to assign separate UVs for these sides. So what I did was I grabbed 3 up to here, and then I played around in the UV editor. So if I set this to U for UVs, you can see that these right here are not connected. They're really not in a straight line. So I think I grabbed them and pressed U. Let me see which one I did. It might have been angle based, and then I straightened it, I think. Yeah, I think I did that. So I grabbed these points here, GX to bring them over, and then set it to medium point. You can do that here. Do SX0, and then same thing here. Grab all those, XX or Shift X0, and then I grabbed both of these. Well, basically I just kind of brought them back close to each other, and then grabbed these and then just scaled them into Z to where these middle ones looked horizontal here, and then I just grabbed both of these and then SY again, like so. And then once I've got this pretty close, I can now go into the shader editor and say, hey, I want this to be the plywood edge. So tab in edit mode again, and then click assign. So now if I go into rendered view, into camera view, now you can see I've got this going, but they're rotated wrong. So I'm gonna just control and grab these, bring it over like that. And then yeah, now you can go through and you can play with, you know, if I tab in edit mode, I can scale it in the Y, and I can just make this however many plies I want. And then if you go look at references, anytime you have plywood, typically the middle pieces are the filler board, and then you want the white to be on top. So if I scroll down like this, or GY, bring that down, and then SY to something like that, that's basically going to get you this plywood edge. And so yeah, that's kind of how I textured this. And then I think I also added a bevel modifier as well, just to not have a perfectly sharp edge here. So if you go over here, add bevel, I made it super small, like 0.001, and then set this to like 4. It's probably easier to do this in solid mode and then zoom in just to where you can kind of see, you kind of get this more natural looking, because you're never gonna have a perfectly sharp edge on plywood. So just make sure you're focused on trying to match real world values. Okay, so that's basically that scene. So if I turn both of these back on here, let's see where those are at. Not those. Here. Let's go back into rendered view real quick. Okay, so I don't think there's anything else really to talk about. I'm using that same technique of having a light shining on the back to give us this nice gradient. And then I'm zooming in here, and you know, basically that's when I cut to the other one. I'm using motion blur, and then this one I also rendered out at 60 frames per second. I had this set to 200 samples. I definitely think I could have rendered it higher, because I saw some noise that I kind of gone back and like changed if I want to. But this was a 1-week project. My goal is to keep making a project every week in addition to all the work that I've got going on. So a lot of times I don't have tons of time to clean up and make something super crazy. So anyway, that's what I have here. Let's real quickly look at this last scene and just kind of break this down, and then we're going to be through with this episode. Okay, let's quickly break down this last scene kind of in the shot as well. I'm going to set this to rendered view. Honestly, this was like basically a 1-day deal, because I got to the middle of the week and I didn't have anything else going. And I was like, I really want these wood and metal materials that I was inspired by to like be tied to a product. So I basically have been using these iMesh materials, or these assets. There's awesome company. They have some really amazing Blender optimized interior assets. So I grabbed one of their chairs and I replaced the screws with some of these metal balls. And then I actually forgot to save one of the files that I rendered. So like this little ball is messed up. So if I go all the way over here, I should have parented that. So let's grab this, Control P and K. So yeah, basically I just wanted something that was wood and had this hammered metal, and I just grabbed a couple assets and set up kind of a studio scene. To break down the lighting here real quick, I'm using that same good old Creative Office HDRI. I have it set to 1.5, and then all I did was grab this, my camera is here. I don't know why it's scaled so small, but I'm gonna zoom in. So I just literally, this ball is on one axis moving along the Z axis. Also, I parented my depth of field to the ball. I'm gonna bring this over so y'all can see a little better. So all I did was go to my camera and then add an object constraint and then target it to this. So that means, you know, wherever I move this sphere, my camera is gonna stay pointed at it, which is kind of a nice little effect. Like it could fly in from all the way over here. Anyway, sorry about that. So yeah, I set that up and then I just animated it going into kind of like a finishing, you know, plug for this hole. And then as I back up, I just keyframed the camera, kind of backing away from the chair. And honestly, if you go in here, like to my location keyframes, this was a lot to kind of, well, it makes it hard to see this in this view, but it was a little difficult to get the timing of everything right. So it takes time for your animations to look smooth. You really have to play with your curve modifiers and your handles on your keyframes to really make things look smooth and polished. So yeah, I set all that up, and then I think that was basically it. I rendered this out at, look at this, I used 150 samples on this. I probably should have used more just because of, I did this because of time. Also, I've been using an amazing company called Praxilla. I wanted to talk about them more in this video, but I'm probably going to do a full video soon. They have an add-on baked into Blender that I can just render this animation from, and then they have an amazing set of like GPUs with cloud networking. So instead of like uploading my Blender file to a thing and having to go through and change everything, they use all of Blender's most popular add-ons. Really great team. If you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I can give you some more direct contact with them, and I'll probably make a video about them shortly. But I did render some of these scenes with their service, and it was so good. So yeah, I rendered this out, and then the last thing that we can look at really quickly is I'll jump into DaVinci Resolve and show you a couple things that I did for post-processing, and then after that, we're gonna have to cut this one short. So let's jump over to DaVinci. Okay, here I am in DaVinci. I'm gonna make sure my desktop audio is turned off. I think that's gonna work. But yeah, I'm in DaVinci here. This is where you can see where I did like the basic sound design. Nothing super crazy, honestly. But all I did was I'm using Soundly. It's a free, I got it from a Polyforward video. It's a free software that you can import little clips of sounds. I'm not a good sound designer. I've been trying to work with more sound designers recently. So if you're interested, definitely reach out to me on Instagram. But yeah, as far as like actual editing to the colors, if you go over here in the color tab, you can see that it looks like I adjusted up. Let's see if I have anything really happening on this here. It doesn't look like I did too much. The only thing I really did was I have this set of cinematic LUTs that I got from a course. And if you go in here, I grabbed one that I thought I liked. And then if you go to this little tab, I have it set to a strength of 0.5. Basically, I'll just zoom, or I don't know if I can make this much bigger, but if I control D, you can see it's kind of warming this back up. So this kind of looks greenish, and then it kind of brings this back into more of a natural looking wood color. So I just hovered over these until I saw something that I liked the way that it made the colors look, and then I applied that over it. And then also in DaVinci, I have an effect set up on these videos. So if you go over here to the effects, I have a film grain set up. It's very, it's very hard to see. It's very light, but I feel like a little bit of film grain always ties everything together, especially when it's CG. And then I also have lens distortion applied. If you zoom in here, it may be a little strong, honestly. I probably should have set the red one like negative 0.01. And then set the red, or yeah, this one to negative 0.01. But a little bit of that just kind of helps your edges not feel so CG. They kind of have a little bit of acting like it's shot in a real camera. So I always tend to add those couple things to my renders. And then yeah, on this one shot here, I did speed ramp it. I'm in DaVinci Resolve 20. They have the new speed ramp in there now, which is pretty cool. It's a little more intuitive to work with. So yeah, I brought in this shot. I had this shot where I'd set up in one of the things where the camera panned out at 60 frames a second. So then I speed ramped it down. And then I have this other shot where I zoomed in, And then all I did was just cut that video and then crop it in. So it's not super high resolution, but again, in a 1 week project, it's kind of all I had time for. And then I just cut back to this video. And then, you know, I already been looking at this wood and material. So then I kind of cut it directly. This isn't super complex cuts at all. And then also one thing that I wish I had changed, if you see how dark this background is in comparison to this background, I wish I would have kept that background a similar color. So that's a hindsight mistake I wish I would have fixed. So yeah, then I just brought all these in, and then there was one frame that I had an issue with, so I just cut that out here and you can't even really see it. And then I cut to black, and then, you know, I imported that into the video. So that's kind of where I went with that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's basically the entirety of what I did. Like I said, 1 week projects, hopefully I'm trying to do at least a full published video and project every week. That's the goal. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm trying to make a video every week. I'd like to keep making content that I wish other people had made when I was trying to learn Blender and get into it. So if this is interesting to you and you've watched all the way this far, liking and subscribing would really be helpful for me, because I would like to continue to grow this platform out and reach more people. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. You can also reach me on Instagram. I'm pretty good about responding to DMs over there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and we will see you in the next one.